Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the fourth episode of Observable Flutter. I am your host, Craig Labenz, and today we're going to have a continuation of our last episode before the new year, where if you tuned in, you saw me flounder around with uninstalled Android emulators and overall have a bit of a yak shaving episode before we could actually get to the good stuff. But Jose, who kind of suffered through that with me, has been kind enough to return today. So Jose is once again my guest, and he's waiting backstage right now. Um, let's see, I'll switch over to Jose. Are you ready?
Probably. Hello, hello.
Welcome. Welcome.
Hey.
So you were just talking about how you wanted to recap again Google Pay and everything that the package can do in Flutter. So uh, the stage is yours. Why don't you summarize for folks what all we can get done with this?
Absolutely. Before that, thank you for having me again. I may get used to this if we keep on doing episodes together. Yeah, so for the Flutter plugin for payment, what we were trying to do last time is collect payments on your Flutter application with the help of the Play plugin for Flutter. Just one maybe thing to get started with, one little comment is that there's two types of payments that you can collect on mobile applications. Well, Flutter does more than mobile, but let's say since we are covering Android and iOS for this plugin, let's concentrate on that. One of them is in-app payments, and the other one is physical payments. Without navigating too much into each of those, we're going to concentrate on physical payments. Those are payments for things like clothes, gym memberships, maybe physical movies, things that exist in the real world that you can order that you typically pay with your credit card for. And those are the payments that we're going to enable our Flutter applications to collect in this episode, as well as we tried in the previous one. But this time I have a feeling that it's going to go a bit better. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is too. So I did end up figuring out what was, well, we got to the end. We got to the finish line in the last episode, but my emulator was going so slowly that we just couldn't suffer through it anymore. But when I looked at it later, it just worked. So we
Huh.
actually did troubleshoot everything correctly. But this time, all the same, you're going to be driving. So you're the Google Pay expert. So I'm pretty confident.
Cool. And I'm going to surely need some support from the Flutter end. So it's good to have you in the back. So we can, why don't we get going?
All right, let's do it.
All right. So let's start from the very beginning. We have an empty folder where we want to create our project. We're going to start with a new project altogether so that you get a sense on how to integrate the plugin right from the beginning. So let's create a new Flutter project. We're going to call it EasyPay Flutter. I think I have to use underscore here. And while that's very quick. So I can just simply go in there, see what's in here, the typical Flutter project structure. So let's open it in code. There we go. That looks more familiar to me. And so as we were commenting a second ago, we want to enable payments in this application. We're going to sell, let's say, T-shirts, and we want to give our users a way to capture payments. Now, one thing to note is that this plugin allows you to add payment providers to your application. It doesn't process payments. What do I mean with that? I mean that we're going to be using Google Pay on Android applications and Apple Pay on iOS applications. For those services, you still need to have a payment processor in the back, like Stripe, Braintree, WorldPay. There's many of them. And I'm sure you're using one of them already if you're here. What we're going to do is add this additional layer of payment services that will make collecting payments easier for your users. It's just one thing to keep in mind. Great. So we have this structure of our project. I don't think we need to launch the app right away. We trust that the projects that Flutter creates are actually looking good. So if you go to the main page of the plugin in pub.dev, which is the one that we are going to integrate, the pay plugin, you can see a good amount of relevant information. I think the two areas that I'll concentrate on is the README, where you have like a really quick tutorial to learn how to use the package. And then you have the repository in GitHub, because this is an open source project. But we can talk more about that in just a second. So first things first, you have a good number of prerequisites that I recommend you taking a look into, especially if you're going if you're going to integrate this plugin for production usage, then you will need some of those steps. For testing purposes, we are not going to need those, so we're going to skip them for now. Just for you to know that they are important if you want to integrate for a production integration of the pay plugin. So let's start by adding the dependency, which is going to be version 1011 of the pay package. So let's go. This is a great refresher of my Flutter skills. I think it's been a year since I haven't touched Flutter, so we'll see how it goes. Oh, dependencies I don't need. I already
You're
have
adding
them.
a redundant line there. There you go. Nice.
Already, great start already. Good, as I say, we have Flutter pub executing get. So I have my dependency available. Let's go ahead and see how the app looks like in the meantime. So we have a really basic material app with a little counter. Actually, let me just show it. I think it's just nicer if I show it. So I'll start Pixel 4 simulator. Now, talking about simulators, there's a couple of things that we learned during the last episode. One of them is that you need to make sure that you start a simulator that has Google Play services, because Google Pay works on top of Google Play services. So if you start a simulator that only has the Google APIs, then you're not going to be able to see the button. So that's now, we just took away 20 minutes from the previous video, so we're good.
More than that, I fear. Oh boy.
All right, so I think I can just run this and see how it looks like. And while this runs, I see that I have a body with so that's a body of my app with a column view that can have multiple children. I have a text and another text, and then I have a button at the bottom. So I'll just simply add a button here. Should we start with the Google Pay or the Apple Pay integration, Craig? What do you feel like today?
So we're on an Android emulator. So I think Apple Pay is probably the wrong tree to bark up. What do you think?
That's a obvious answer and a good idea. So why don't we go with Google Pay? We already saw an error, and that is because the Google Pay plugin, the Pay plugin, needs the minimum SDK version of Android 19. So we need to fix that. To do that, that's a general useful recommendation for doing Android things on your Flutter applications, is opening Android Studio, which is, as you know, the most used, widely used IDE for Android applications. So if we open Android Studio, you can simply open the Android folder in your Flutter project. And if you do that, you're going to have a nice view that you're familiar with about the Android project in our Flutter application. And what you want to go is the build cradle in your application folder. Let's switch to the project view so that we can access the files before the content loads. And then we can open the app cradle, where we have basic configuration. I'm sure you're familiar with this file already. And we have a section in here that it's called min SDK version. And we saw in the logs that we need 19 there. And again, this is because the Google Pay library needs a minimum version of 19 on the API. So we save, we sync, and now we should be able to run the application.
Now, while that cooks, I have a question. whenever I've needed to edit that file, I always just stay in VS Code. Are there niceties around those Android specific edits that draw you back to Android Studio?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for me, it's probably because I haven't done a lot of Android development on VS Code, and maybe there's tools for doing the things that I do in Android Studio. But I'm personally familiar with Android Studio and there's things like the Gradle sync that probably you also have in VS Code. But it's really easy to access. It's easy to find your SDK directory and configuration on the preferences. It's also easy to launch and manage your simulators. You can see your simulators in VS Code and launch them, but it's also the manager for creating new ones or changing the configuration. For me,
Yeah.
it's definitely much easier to find in Android Studio.
Yeah, indeed. I've certainly never configured an Android emulator in VS Code. All right, we're back.
How far should we get to? Okay, it looks like this works.
12,000.
Maybe this breaks at 59. Oh yeah, it broke. Actually, no, it works. Okay, so that works fine. So we can go back.
Oh, real quick.
Yep.
Chat is asking to increase the font size. Be good to go,
yep.
Full screen on your IDE window, and then, full screen up until the emulator. Yeah, and then a couple command pluses probably, at least. Could maybe do another one, and
Okay.
And then you can get rid of the left bar if you're comfortable with that, which I think is nice. You got it.
Let's put this down. Sorry for that. Good. All right. I want to have Damien. Thank you, Damien. I want to have some space here. What do you typically recommend here in Flutter? Size box or margins or something else?
Size box is always fair because you can const that as well. Of course, if you have a responsively sized size box, then you can no longer use const. But, there you go. I think that'll do it.
So let's do Google Pay button. And there's a few required params that we see right away here. One of them is called payment configuration asset. So if that doesn't make sense to you, there's a little note to that in the tutorial right at the beginning, right after you add the dependency. So this is basically a JSON file now. It's going to be a configurable string in the future, in the really short-term future, where you add information about how do you want your payment to be. And to make this a bit easier, there's a couple examples in the GitHub repo in the assets folder. So let's take a look at a basic one for Google Pay, for example. As you can see, you have things like the types of card that you want to accept, the networks, the payment gateway that you use, and maybe some information about the items that you're selling. Some of this information can be dynamic as well.
Can you increase the font size on GitHub as well? Yeah, nice.
And hopefully this works for the others. Yeah, good. So yeah, it's just basic configuration about how you want Google Pay in this case to work. So we're going to take one of those as an example. Let's take the default payment profile for Google Pay. So you can see similar information. I'm going to copy that into my assets folder on the Flutter project. So let's do let's create an assets folder, and then a new file. That's going to be Google Pay config.json. Paste that information that I'm personally happy with. Let's say maybe for the address, I don't want to have my phone number required because then you're going to see it on screen, and then everything else looks good, I think.
You know, one is hitting you up with late night texts.
Yeah, especially given that this is PST friendly. So in 6 hours, that's gonna mean wake up calls.
True.
All right. So we have one thing that I have missed already is that I have an asset now. I have a JSON file in my assets folder. That means that I need to specify that on my pubspec.yaml, I think. and tell it that we're going to have some files in the assets folder. I think that this should suffice. And now all we need to do is just pass in the name of the file. That will be enough for the Google Pay button to figure out what it needs to do. This has a callback for whenever the payment returns a result. For now, we're going to print it so we can see it on the screen. And we have a list of payment items. So this is going to be, because every time you sell something, it's going to be something different with a different price and different text. That's something that you can pass to the button dynamically. You can build it based on the status or the things that the user is buying, and then you can pass it onto the button. What we're going to do, just for the purpose of this example, is add it as a constant thing here. That's going to be called payment items. It's going to be an array of items. You can have multiple items. For example, let's say that you have a final invoice that has, or a final checkout page that has 2 items, and then maybe some VAT, and then a total price. And you can have all those 4 different items on this list. And each payment
So this
item
is
will have,
essentially this is essentially someone's cart when they're checking out, right?
correct. This is what's going to show on the payment sheet when Google Pay or Apple Pay opens to give the user information about what they're paying for. So you don't need to have maybe the same level of detail, but something that that you think is enough for that amount of real estate in the screen for the user to recognize the payment. Just say that label is going to be total. The amount is $100, and the type is going to be payment item type of that.
That total? Is that what you're looking for?
Status. Final price. So the status will indicate what's the. I'm trying to look for a word different from status, but nothing's coming to mind. So basically, it's just telling your customers about the status of the payment. That is whether the payment will change, or is unknown, or the price is final. So let's say, for example, you are selling, or your users are buying a ride on a bike sharing service, and you don't know what the total amount is going to be, but you have a fixed amount, you have a fixed rate. So you can set that fixed rate as your payment item amount, and then specify or set the status as unknown, or something that is pending that will change after the ride happens, to give the user, again, that kind of visual indication that the price is not final. In our case, the price of the shirt that we're going to sell is going to be a final price, so you can very well say that it's final.
Is there like an estimated status? I don't know, just thinking about someone getting on a ride share. Oh, pending, yeah. Seems like that probably, yeah.
Yeah, but that's also the result of trying to make both platforms work. I think, in fact, Google Pay has an estimated flag, I believe so, but not Apple Pay. So I think pending works for both of them. But this could be one of those scenarios in which it makes sense to split them in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so let's pass the payment items to our Google Pay button. And with that, we seem to be ready with the basic integration, and already saving shows the Google Pay button on the screen of our application. So let's go ahead and try to pay and see what happens. All right, so my test account is showing there with a test card as well. So there's nothing interesting about it. So you can see I have all the information. I can change the account or change the payment method. When I'm ready to go, I can hit continue. But before that, you can see a red text in there that is basically telling us that we are operating in test mode. That is, no charge to your card is going to take place until you go into production. So if I hit continue, nothing's going to happen. I'm going to receive a test response. So let me do it. And so you can see the payment sheet disappeared. And then as I was printing on the payment result, I'm getting that information in here, this kind of map or dictionary looking data. And as you can see here, we have some information about the payment, like the billing address, like the card used to pay. This is all metadata for you to use after the payment happens. The most important bit of information here is the tokenization data. This, the information behind this param is what you need to send to your payment gateway or your PSP to actually process the payment. And since we are operating in test, this just has some dummy information. So on the token, so you can see we have something that looks like example payment method token. Whereas in a production environment, you will see something that is not readable. It's basically an encrypted payment payload that your PSP will be able to process and issue the order.
And that token, there's no other keys in this nested dictionary, right? It's just that token actually contains the goods outside of a production or outside of the test environment.
That's right. Yeah, that's internally a little like another nested dictionary, but it's encrypted. So far, it's just like an opaque blurb of chars, really.
Nice.
Okay, what are the things we can do with this button? So there's, well, I'll get to that in a sec, the different integration paths. But there's some other fields that we can have in here. Just because this button is managed, quote unquote, with that I mean that the button is doing a lot of things for you. You can configure also a number of parameters. For example, you may want the button to be hidden if the user in question cannot pay with Google Pay and instead show a different widget. You can do that with the child on error param. You can, for example, add a text. Let's actually try it. Text saying Google Pay is not supported. This will be shown as a replacement of the Google Pay button. So if we do this and then we mess with the configuration, let's say we break it like that, and reload, the button shouldn't show.
Oh, wow.
But I think we have broken it so much that the JSON is incorrect. So it's breaking before it's saying your JSON is not valid. So let's say, just make it a bit easier for it.
So the JSON will at least parse, but then it will be, wow.
So you see, let's say for your app, you're supporting like 20 payment methods, and you simply just want the ones that are not supported to hide or show something different. You can use that child on error for that purpose. I think it's handy.
Yeah, that is quite handy. So Jose, we have a few questions in the chat. We've already basically gotten further than we got last episode because your emulator works out of the gate. So I was thinking we could maybe pause and chat about a few things, including maybe this question to start. Oh, it went away. I don't know why it went away. Where is the first part? Juneveld asks. And the first part is on YouTube, but you've already seen the entirety of that episode in terms of GPay or Google Pay, payments collecting, everything, progress. Only watch that episode at this point if you want to watch me try to install Android emulators on a computer that was overtaxed by streaming. But good question. And this is a similar question that we had from last week, Jose. Can you speak to the relationship with Stripe? You mentioned a little bit about it a second ago, that there does still need to be a payment processor in the background, but can you say a little bit more about how Stripe factors into all this and the Stripe library?
Yeah, so Stripe is a payment gateway. That is a collection of services that will help you collect payments in your services, in your application, your backend, in your mobile application. It's the responsible entity of moving the funds. So if you need to collect $20 from your customer, then the actual transfer of funds will be done by a PSP, by Stripe, for example. Google Pay, or a payment facilitator like Google Pay or Apple Pay, they are not actually doing the transfer of funds. They're not doing the processing itself. They're simply helping your customers to pay. Why? Because in their Google accounts or in their Apple accounts, they already have their frequently used cards that they use for online payments. They already have them there, so they don't need to type them every single time again, right? So when you use Google Pay, you are giving that ease of checking out to your customers. So they can just simply click with a couple of tabs, they can simply check out. And then that information of the payment method that they have selected, that information is then being sent to your payment gateway, for example, Stripe. There's multiple payment gateways that connect to or can be used with Google Pay, also with Apple Pay. You have them in the Google Pay documentation site, which I can write somewhere, maybe in the comments. Maybe it's not a good idea in a live stream, but you can find them there. And many of them have APIs, SDKs, and libraries that you can use in conjunction with Flutter. Concretely for Stripe, they also have a Flutter plugin that it's very easy to use with this plugin. So basically, you will get what we have in the payment result here, the payload that is being returned from Google Pay in this case. They have a method. They have a little class with a method that takes that and creates the order on the Stripe end. So there's other PSPs like that will make that integration very easy. And I hope that addresses the question. Let me know otherwise.
Yeah, I think that was quite detailed. Thank you. There was another question. This is a little Android specific. And I think I kind of gather that you have a bit more Android experience than I do. So I was curious what you thought about this question. Out of curiosity, why didn't you locate the Flutter Min SDK version property rather than directly inserting 19? I have guesses, but they are just guesses.
Okay, yeah, let's try with the combined knowledge of everyone here and see if we can find a solution. Because I was looking into this today, I wanted to know where that property was set. And I was just looking around on Android Studio, and I couldn't find it. So if there's a way to do this, that would be fantastic. Maybe if you know Lodeki Brian, or you know Craig as well. I was looking in Gradle local properties. You have some of them here, but those are not. There's not Min SDK version. So if we could find where that is being set, that'll be great. Do you know where those are set?
I don't. That's why I was saying I have only guesses. I mean, so I would start by just grepping for that string min SDK version, see if it shows up anywhere.
Yeah,
But it might be like a thing that gets string replaced at build time and it comes from, some kind of deep buried place.
I think so. Oh,
Yeah, I'm not sure. So, okay. Yeah, here we have, but 19, that's what you set it to. So these are probably build artifacts, right?
yeah, and those
What
are
path
build
these in?
times. So the manifest has been
Build
like,
directory, yeah.
yeah, this is build directory. So
So is there anything not in the build directory here?
this one, which is what we set it to.
Just,
So
yeah, okay. So my second thing that I would do to figure that out is just ask someone on the Flutter team who works specifically on the Android bindings, and then they'll just tell me. But
yeah,
no,
that's
I don't
actually a
know.
good
That
idea.
was a good, great question, Brian.
Yeah, I was looking for that one, and I think it'll be elegant if we could do it that way. Yeah.
All right, two more I think that would be good to get to now, and then we'll carry on. So this question is kind of a mix of information about, or like mechanics of the API itself, and then just kind of, I think, a little bit of maybe general application development. Oh, I clicked the wrong one. I do want to get to this question, but the list jumped on me. Shivam asks, but what if we try to send the token information to our payment gateway, but the API call fails?
Yeah, so that's logic that you have to also, that's business logic that you have to handle in your application, similar to if something else fails, right? Like if any part of the process of the payment process fails, then at some point you want to show some error to your users, or maybe even retry before you show some error. So that really depends on your strategy towards resilience, how defensive you're planning to do it. But that's something that falls under your responsibility, because let's say Google Pay or any payment provider will give you the payment information that the user chose when they open the payment sheet, but then you will have to send it to your gateway. So if that fails, then you have control over that, and you can react to it if you need to.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to restate what I'm hearing you say here. The interaction with the pay package, that's kind of all on device. And then once you start to send that information to Stripe or whomever, you've now left the universe of this package. And so an error that you get there, that's just entirely outside the scope of the pay package because you've moved on to the next step in the process. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. Maybe we can illustrate it a bit more. So if we, instead of doing print, we create a little method that takes the result. We call it on Google Pay result, void on Google Pay result, and then payment results, right? So that's what's going to be called when your users select a form of payment. And what you have to do here is something like your PSP library create order payment result dot token, something similar to that, right? So whenever, so let's reload this.
Yeah, what's it upset about there?
Maybe like yeah, ASCII code, just doing command space and creating a unrecognizable character. That happened to me so many times, so many times. I don't know, maybe it's
Wow,
my
that's
typing
never
skills.
happened to me.
Yeah, it's definitely my typing style, but I have a really weird typing style, I have to confess.
Yeah, because
So
we computer differently.
when you continue, that payment selection is going to be sent to this method, and then you're going to call your PSP on that line, right? Or either through your backend or directly through their library, containing the result of the payment. If this request fails, however you want to do it, something like maybe const result. If this fails, if
Mm-hmm.
result equals some
Retry
error,
logic.
then yeah, retry logic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's really in your hands and something you can control over. You have control over it.
Um, okay. Oh, there's another question, and we've kind of lightly touched on this, but I think it might be interesting to talk a little bit more about the mechanics. A GDE from Thailand, Vong, I hope I'm saying that even remotely close to correctly, um, says, can we run this payment process in the dev environment? Now, we are in the dev environment right now, but what are the exact limitations of what we can and cannot do? I mean, obviously, we didn't get a real token there. So Stripe is not going to care about the like your token here value that we just got. So do we have to turn off the dev environment to integrate with Stripe, or can we kind of connect to a dev environment in Stripe as well?
First of all, thank you for the question. I really enjoy this topic, and I think it's very important, especially in the context of payments, right? You want to make sure that everything works. You want to make sure that this is part of your testing protocols or processes. So for now, as Craig pointed out, what you get is a dummy response or result. That means that you'll have to test both services separately. You have to test Google Pay in one hand and then your payment processor separately. Wouldn't it be great if you could like test everything together, like in a more like end-to-end like test, right? In which you could retrieve the test result from Google Pay and then send that to your PSP, and your PSP confirm that and say, hey, there's a test transaction, but this worked fine. You can go into production. That's something that is not possible today on Google Pay nor Apple Pay, as far as I know. We are, though, working internally to tackle precisely just that and give you a set of test cards. You're probably
Mm,
familiar with PSP's test cards. They have a collection. They are different in each PSP, but they have a collection of
like
test cards that you can use
4444,
to,
all those, yeah.
yeah, yeah, to test different scenarios. So we are working on providing you with those cards on Google Pay so that you can test the entire transaction end to end with your PSP, which we think we're personally very excited about, and we think it's going to make a big difference to your testing processes, hopefully.
Nice. Well, yeah, that will be amazing. Okay, last question for now, I promise. Then we return to the features. This is a great question that I had as well, and I think we got last week, and it's definitely worth hitting again. Mangerdas asks, can we load the payment items from an API, maybe Firebase Remote Config, or are these expected to be constant? And he's asking this, of course, because we just showed, this hard-coded asset file that wouldn't be very mutable. So, Jose,
Yeah, so this
let's say,
is, well, thank you for the question. We're getting such good questions. This is incredible. It's literally the things that I wanted to talk about. I was writing not to forget, and then everyone is helping us cover those topics. So thanks for the question
Incredible.
again. We have a variable here, or a param in the Google Pay button widget that lets you add payment items in here. You can put literally anything valid in here. That is, with valid, I mean a list of payment items. You can construct that in however way you find it more useful. Either you typically do it as you suggested, you load that information from somewhere. In fact, we would recommend you doing that because, as you know, client applications are by default not safe in terms of security, right? So you want to make sure that your important things like the price come from a safe place or a safe environment, like a protected backend system. And so what you do, you fetch that information from your backend, and then with that information, you will construct your payment items. Instead of hard coding it like we are doing in here, you would build those little fields as a result of what you get from your backend request, if that makes sense.
Now I have a related question here, because the payment items, this is like what the user is buying, right? So of course this wouldn't be hard coded, because who knows what they're going to put in their cart, right?
Right.
A question that I actually misread Megradas's actual question, and what I thought he was asking was about that config. And that was a question that I thought we got last week. And I have honestly not even really studied what goes in that JSON file, the Google Pay config. Is it a realistic need for an app developer to have the contents of that file be dynamic?
Yeah. And I think there's a use case for that. Right now, it's only possible to either create them. So let's take a step back quickly. There's two ways of integrating this plugin. One of them is what we call kind of the easy or the manage or the quick setup, in which you have the widgets, you place them in your UI, and you're good to go. There's another more involved way in which you're doing each request separately. In the advanced use case, you can pass in the configuration as a string as well. That means that you have full control over changing that or making that as dynamic as you need to. Now, we are also working on bringing that dynamicity, if you can say that word, that kind of dynamic nature to the widget as well. So there's in fact a pull request open that will be merged in the next few days that will give you the ability to add a dynamic configuration to the kind of the quick or easy integration path as well. Because we agree, we think that there's a good reason to have a need to have this information change. You may have, for example, in multiple countries, you may want to support different payment methods, for example. There's a whole like gazillion of cases that you may want to support. So yeah, it's a good one.
All right, so all of the things are flexible at runtime. Okay, well, I've interrupted you for quite a while here with some great questions, and now I ask you to just pick up your train of thought from 15 minutes ago.
Should we do Apple?
Sure, yeah. Is that we do have some questions actually also about whether or not this supports iOS and Apple and all that. So hooking up Apple Pay would certainly answer that question. Do we need to switch emulators? And is your iOS emulator ready to go?
I think so. But before we do that, just one quick thing that I forgot to mention is that you can have multiple button types, because you may want to have a Pay with Google Pay or something different. So the type param in the Google Pay button will give you a few options. So you can go with donate, for example, and then the label will obviously change. So that you can use that to make the Google Pay button adapt to what you're collecting payments for. All right.
Nice.
So yeah, let's in the same application, that's the whole purpose of Flutter. We're going to add an Apple Pay button because we want to support with this application both platforms. We need to start a iOS simulator. And that's something that I'm used to seeing here below. Oh, we just didn't have space. That's why I couldn't see it. So let's start the iOS simulator. And in the
Now,
meantime,
last episode, I was having trouble getting this going, and we concluded that it would only work on a physical device. Was that wrong? Was I just doing something incorrect?
That was not my conclusion. Maybe it was your conclusion.
Oh, okay. Well, great. I'd
It
love to
should
have that
work.
conclusion disproved.
I think though that it could be that there's something you need to enable here in this simulator that I already have enabled. I don't recall
Mm.
needing to do that at the beginning, but there's certainly some wallet or Apple Pay configuration in here. Like here, you can see authorize Apple Pay. Again, I don't think I needed to do that. For me, it was just adding an account to my simulator, and it was working.
Okay.
So, but
All right. Well,
and
I'm
I don't think
excited to
that
see
was
it
your
work.
issue, to be honest. Okay. So similarly, we need a configuration asset. So let's go ahead and look for a sample configuration for Apple Pay. So just so that I don't have to write the whole thing myself, that will take a long time. And yeah, it's going to take away some precious time that you don't want me to take away from you. So we'll copy it and we'll create a new asset called Apple Pay config.json. Instead, you'll see similar information here. Some of this is tailored more towards what the Apple Pay library expects, like the merchant identifier, or you see that the supported networks have a different format as well as the merchant capabilities. You can find detailed information about what is expected here in the Apple Pay documentation, the same as you can do for the Google Pay configuration. You can find it in the reference for the Google Pay online API. So let's say that this all looks correct. So you can see here we have some shipping method information as well that will be added as options to the user. So going back to our Apple Pay button in our UI, we are going to add the configuration JSON file. And for the result, we're going to emulate what we had before on Google Pay and just print it to see what's the outcome. And I think the same payment item should work for Apple Pay as well. So I think we can just go ahead and launch it. One question that I have, maybe you can help me with, is if I'm running my app on a Android simulator, can I run it at the same time on an iOS simulator, or do I need to stop the
You
session?
sure should be able to. If you
Okay.
think back to Flutter Interact in New York in 2019, this is a bit of a deep cut, but Chris Sells, who was then still on the Flutter team, demonstrated what was it called? The Flutter Octagon or Octopus or something. I think it was actually just 7, but nearly 8 versions of the same app running at the same time off one laptop,
Oh,
connected to a
wow.
ton of different devices.
I wish I had been there.
It was a fun event right before COVID hit. We had no idea that it was going to be the last time we all got together for so long.
Maybe next time, though.
But yeah, you should be able to click and fire it up.
I should have better chances on being part of the next event after having been here you twice. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but that's what I have in my mind.
You are now on the list of people that I will reach out to about speaking at events. While
Amazing.
this builds, I think there is a question that we can probably cover rather quickly. Luxmi asks, will this help with in-app purchases?
It won't. Thank you for the question, Lakshmi. It comes back to the distinction that we made at the very beginning between the types of payments that you typically can get on a mobile application. One of them will be in-app payments. Those are payments which are generally digital goods which are bound to your application and the App Store or the Google Play Store. Things like, for example, features of your app on a premium version of your app, or digital currencies or lives in a game. Those will be good examples of digital items that you need to collect using in-app purchase and the in-app purchase libraries. This is different. So those will not qualify from using the online APIs for Google Pay or Apple Pay. The payments that we are talking about in this session are payments for typically physical items, like a clothing item, like a new speaker, like a gym membership, those which are outside of the policy of the app stores, and those that you typically collect payments through PSPs or through customers paying with cards directly. It's important to make this distinction because if you qualify or if your app qualifies what you're selling is part of the policy of the App Store, collection in-app payments, you have to use that one, right? But if it doesn't, then you can use physical payments, you can use Google Pay, Apple Pay, and your payment processor. So I hope that clarifies, but if it doesn't, there's a really nice summary, at least on the Google Play side, giving you like a few bullet points to help you make the distinction. But rule of thumb, generally, again, not for all cases, generally digital goods, in-app payments, physical goods, you can use your PSP with Google Pay or Apple Pay.
Nice. All right, we're up and running.
So we have the button. We'll see what happens today. Everything is coming. I don't like it when everything works on the first attempt. Maybe there's something bigger to happen later on.
Well, there
We'll
are
see.
some predictions in chat that it isn't going to work.
Huh. All right.
We'll
All right.
see.
Like a bit bigger. And let's change the type as well, like we did for the Google Pay button. As you can see, we have now the available types are different because those are the ones supported by Apple Pay. So let's say in-store. That's a bit confusing if we say in-store because it looks
Right.
like a different in-app in-store. That's not the case. That probably means in a physical store. And I think because
Also,
this is
the button is not changing.
and I think that's because it's I just refreshed and it's not changing either. So my hypothesis was that given that this is like a native platform component on iOS, so this is building the Apple Pay button using the Apple SDK, it needs to restart the app. That was not working either. So let me try a different one. Problems.
Pretty
I like
surprising.
it. Let's see if we don't have enough space. No, we do have enough space.
The 50 looks
45.
nice, though. 450. Oh, 45.
Yep.
Yeah.
45 is the actual one.
Okay.
Good. Type, that's the right one. Apple button type. That should be fine. Let's see. Let me go for the basic obvious. Oh, we have two instances. I killed the wrong one, I think. Yep. Oh, maybe that was the case. Yeah, that was the problem. I was refreshing on the Android one, I think.
Oh.
Correct.
Hey, look at that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a little foot gun to be aware of when you've got multiple simulators going in parallel.
Right. So let's say buy. Why don't we go ahead and try to pay with Apple Pay, Craig?
Let's do it.
All right. Let's try this. So I click the button. This is in Spanish. Why? Because I think this is configured, as a Spanish phone. Okay, I can simply hit on pay with my code. And then as the payment succeeds, then you see a similar response as the one we saw on Google Pay, but this time with Apple Pay information. And concretely, the interesting
token at
part
the very end there, right?
Is a token, which for Apple Pay comes empty in test mode.
Okay, so that's what people in the chat were saying, that it wasn't going to give a token, but we can still get this far.
Yeah,
we didn't get a token in. Yeah, we didn't get a token on Google Pay either. It just got a dummy string that was like example token or something. Yeah, exactly as valuable as the empty string here.
True, although it looks more like kind of working.
Looks closer.
This gives you a weird feeling.
Right.
Yeah,
it does. That's true. All right. Well, this is everything that we tried to do in twice as long last time.
Not bad. There's something else you can change on the Apple Pay button, and that is the style. You have a black, white, or outlined button. So if you feel that your application goes better with a white outline, then you can change it as well.
Without even knowing it, you were answering Hamza's question. Can you change the pay button color?
You can, Hamza. There's some connection here.
Now, I'm wondering, without maybe opening up like a massive can of worms, using the standard branded buttons is definitely a good idea because that's what users are used to. But what if I wanted to just start this process from my own on-click handler? Like if I made my own button for some reason, maybe I had odd responsive constraints or something, and I have my own widgets, but I want to trigger one of these workflows. Is that something that the pay package supports easily?
It does. There's two things to your question. The first one is, can I use different assets for the Apple Pay or Google Pay buttons? And that's the answer to that is no, because you would be violating the branding guidelines. So when you submit your application for approval, so that you can use Apple Pay or Google Pay in production, that will not go through. You will get an email back saying, "Hey, you have to adjust your button to look the way it is intended," and you can see more details on that in the documentation. Now, to the other part of your question, you can have more control over the flow. Um, what we saw here is that you're adding a widget to the UI, and there's some things you can see. There's some things happening in the background that you don't have full control over, like the press event or
Mm-hmm.
what button to show in which scenario, if you're in the right platform and if the payment provider support it. There's a advanced integration path that is also explained in the documentation for this plugin that you can use to have full control over the whole process. And we can take a look if we have some time at the end as well, or maybe even now.
Yeah, there's an interesting and related question in the chat. Fabian asks, can the language of the button be changed?
Yes. So the button supports, the plugin supports localization. So if you add localization information to your application right away, the button will recognize that and will show the button in the right language. But
Nice.
remember that you have to include that in your application the Flutter way. I cannot fully remember, but I think it was a property on the app or on the theme, and then change the locale of your phone, and then the button will adapt to that.
Got it. Nice. Great. Okay, so well, are you ready to move on, or is there more to cover here? Because I know you've gestured multiple times about an easy path, which we've currently gotten working, and a more advanced customized path.
Should we look for trouble and do the advanced one?
If you're ready.
All right, let's try it. So let's say that you want to have control over the events on how the button is integrated and how things show. You have a little excerpt here about the advanced usage, but basically there will be like, it's not super complex, to be honest, just like to say that beforehand. But there's two main things that happen when you use the Pay plugin. The first one is the library will check if the user that is using your application can pay with that payment provider, with Google Pay or Apple Pay in this case. And if the user can pay, that is, if you have an iPhone or an iOS device on Apple Pay, and then you have a created account and you have cards added, then that means the user can pay with Apple Pay. Then the button will show. This is something that happens automatically on the quick integration path. As you saw, there's nothing else that we needed to do to make that working. The other main important call or API event that happens is when the user clicks the button, then you see the payment sheet is coming from the bottom so that the user can select a form of payment and like confirm the payment so that you get that information back as a result. So it's mostly two calls that were being done automatically or automatically for us in the quick path. Now, if we wanted to take control of that, we could do it. It could be that in your application you need to do that because you have like a really kind of detailed way of controlling your checkout process, in which instead of, if the user cannot pay with one provider, instead of not showing the button, you want to do something else, maybe show go to a different screen, maybe log to your backend. So for those scenarios, the advanced path could be interesting to you. My recommendation would be that if you are integrating this plugin for the first time and you don't have a concrete specific need, I'll encourage you to try the quick path, because I believe that path is going to work for most of you. And it's, as you saw, it's very easy to integrate. And then if you see, or if you come across a situation where you need to go a bit deeper and maybe do things in a more particular way for your application, then that's when I would consider the advanced flow. So without further ado, let's take a look at that. So this is just one thing that we add into the source, and that is a pay client. That is the little object that will help us do those requests that we were just talking about. So let's create that pay client inside of our state to make it more concentrated on the parts of our application, keeping things modular to where they need to operate. So that will be an instance of pay, and you will see that there's a few ways to instantiate that, and one of them would be with assets. I know where I'm not getting the autocomplete, but that's basically replicating what we just did before. It's just simply letting us pass a list of configuration JSON files that the pay client will have to deal with. So that looks very similar to what we had when we were passing the buttons before. So it's just the same thing. Why are we doing this? Because the client needs to know what's the actual configuration for both Google Pay and Apple Pay in this case. And I'm getting an error here. Why? Because this is not being used. We are going to fix that in a second. So we said that there's two main calls. The first one that we want to figure out is whether the user in question can pay with, let's do it on Google Pay just to make this easier. I know where my simulator went. It's here. So let's use Google Pay for now. And there's this first request that we have, to know whether the user can pay with Google Pay, it's an async call. So we'll use something called the future builder that I'm not very familiar with, but I have some help, so I'm sure we're going to be able to figure that out.
With our powers combined.
Let's try that. Let me comment that out so we don't see anything else. And then I use a feature builder that will load widgets as a result of an asynchronous call. In this case, user can pay. So the builder, it's going to be, it has this signature. That's the builder param that has information about the actual query, and then that will expect a widget as a return, whatever we want to show. This feature builder widget will also have a future. That is, what do we want to load? What is the async call that we want to make? That's going to be part of the pay client. So concretely, the user can pay. And we're going to pass the pay provider Google Pay because we want to find out about whether the user can use Google Pay or not. So that's all that we need. Now we need to respond to the multiple instances of results that this async call can give us. So we're going to use curly braces, and then I think that's one too much, maybe. So let's just add a placeholder size box for all the cases that we are not going to control for now, just so that it doesn't throw an error. But basically, we want to cover two different scenarios. One, when the when the call is being made, we may want to show something like a spinner or like a loading indicator to let the user know that, hey, there's something going on, just wait for it, it's going to come. And I think, if I remember correctly, that's behind the snapshot property, concretely connection state, right? I think that's connection state. And the connection state
depends.
has a few. Okay.
The connection state could be multiple things, or there could be a data value that changes. I mean, I'm not sure how what the user can pay method returns, how that works. We'd have to interrogate that to be totally sure.
Okay. It's going to make a network request to the Google Pay servers.
Okay, then I think you're checking to see. Okay, this makes sense. Yep.
So let's show a circular indicator while the whole thing loads, and then when the connection is finished, so that is that request, we have a result from the request. Then we're interested in two different use cases as well. we want to know, because the answer or the result of this query is going to be either true or false. True, the user can pay with Google Pay. False, the user cannot pay with Google Pay. And you may want to show something different in your app based on that. So now we're going to look at the snapshot data. And if that's true, that means the user can pay with Google Pay. And in this case, we want to return return Google Pay button. And if that's not the case, let's go back to our previous example and show a text saying, hey, the user cannot pay with Google Pay. Google Pay is not enabled in this device, for example. Google Pay is not enabled in this device. And it doesn't complain anymore because we're returning a widget in every single instance of our if-else tree. Almost are. Now, before we use a widget called Google Pay button, which has all that business logic inside that is doing all those queries for you, all those network requests for you, we have a simplified version, or like UI-only version of that button that it's called raw Google Pay button. When you only are interested about the graphics, like it's the case here. And as you can see here, there's only a few things that you can configure. The type of the button, we are going to stick to our donate button, and the onPressed event. You can see that this is actually we can const this one as well, because it doesn't have any state inside. Keep me true on those things, Craig, but I believe that's the reason why you can const it. So we have all the logic ready, so we can try to run this and see what happens. I'm not sure if I have everything. I do believe I do, but let's try. So what should happen is that the pay client should be instantiated. It should make a call to the user can pay method, and this method should return true because I'm running this on an Android simulator with an account that has Google Pay enabled. This is running on the iPhone. So in fact, let's let it run, because that should return false.
Right.
I don't think it's finished yet. This is probably from the previous.
One.
It's very convenient, though. We could just say, it works, and go back to Android.
Right. You typed the exact same sentence.
Let's see. That's running now. It says, okay.
Great.
So that's good. Now we are going to go back to the Android simulator, for which I need to make this bigger. And pixel, run, go back.
Nice. Now, while this is building, there's one thing I want to talk about, which is line 119. Futures. The future builder has a really kind of alarming footgun, where if you call a method like this in line, and that method doesn't kind of memoize its own network request, and if this method makes a new network request every time you call it, then you can unlock some pretty terrible race conditions in your Flutter app. So the best practice for that method on line 119 would be to put this in a stateful widget, which I think we're in a stateful widget because we're still in the counter part of the counter app. Yeah, and then just save that future in init state, and then actually use the future in the UI.
Something like this, right? And then we have to overwrite init state. Where is actually that? Is that something that I can override in this state?
Yeah. I'm not sure why.
you're. Oh no, not here.
Yeah, you can just make a new method basically in its state. I'm not sure why your snippets didn't pick it up.
Is it like override?
Yep. And then you can call super.init state, all that good stuff.
And then user can pay future. So that would be, that would have to be, why is this complaint? Late. Does it have to be
Yeah.
late?
Yeah, late I think will work. And then you can, or nullable. Actually, nullable is probably better.
Is nullable a how you call it?
Oh, a question mark at the end of the type. But
Ah,
now that I'm
sure.
thinking about it, would we want it to be late?
Late is
Uh,
actually appropriate because we wanted to only load it once and not change it
yeah,
anymore.
init state will be run before the first build method. So late is fine.
Okay. Here's a feature that is pay client, user can pay. Pay provider, Google Pay. Doing things right. And then here, we can change this with user can pay future. I like it more this way.
Perfect.
And this works fine. So now we're making sure that it's only called once. Great. Now I click the button, nothing should happen. It's not even clickable because the unpressed. Remember, we are now in the advanced integration. That is, there's nothing being done for you. You have full control over the whole flow. And that is, if you haven't set a press callback, the button will not be clickable. So let's go ahead and do that. On pressed, on Google Pay pressed. And that doesn't exist. That's why it's complaining. Let's do it right above, which makes more logical sense. Pressed. And then here, we'll be able to do show payment selector. And we can save that already, and the button should be clickable. Not yet. On Google Pay pressed. On Google Pay pressed.
I'm guessing it's a signature. Oh, invalid constant. Yeah, a closure. So we just on line 135, I got to drop the const. Yeah, 135 down.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. And we get red, and that's because.
Yeah, now we'll need to restart.
And now
Nice.
it's clickable. All right, we are on track. Now, what's the second call that we're interested in? The second one on the pay client as well is show payment selector, because now when the button is clicked, now you want to show the payment sheet so that users can select their payment method that they want to pay with. And here, as you can see, we need the payment items now, not before, because we only want to show the payment items that the user is going to pay for when the payment selector goes up and shows. So already if I do this, the payment sheet is going to show. But what I really want to do is capture the result of this request. And that result is being sent directly as a response to this call. So I can directly capture it as a map. I believe it's a map. It's actually a JSON object as a result of this. This is an async call, so I'll have to wait on it, which means I'll have to make this call async as well. And if I now print that payment result, we should see something very similar to what we saw when we integrated the pay plugin through the quick way, through the quick integration. And maybe we can do it right away. Yeah. And continue. Now this time what's different is that this is being done through this method on line 80, not as we did before through the managed button. So now that you have the payment result, the next step for you would be to send that to your PSP. So if you're using a PSP, just similar to what we did here, if you're using your PSP called your PSP, then you can just simply do your PSP lib date order. And remember, this is going, I'm just making this up. This is going to be different on every payment processor token. And that will actually create the order in your payment gateway. So that will be the same outcome, the same result, but now through a completely different integration path in which you have control over the first call to determine if the user can pay with, in this case, Google Pay, but the flow will be similar with Apple Pay. Show the button, capture the press callback, and then issue the payment selector, get the result, send it to your PSP, and the order is created. As you saw, only a couple steps more, but then full flexibility to do your integration as you prefer.
Nice. Yeah,
Let's
I
see.
like that. I know a lot of,
Two.
the more branded an app is, the more likely um, its designers and product folks are to want to control that experience. So it's nice that you can put the Legos back together yourself, just kind of however you want.
Precisely, yeah, that's a goal. So, how are we doing on questions? I have been really bad at keeping track on this time. It's a bit of a challenge when you're typing.
Yeah, you're doing all the work. I'm watching the questions. You're putting together an incredible live demo here. We do have some good questions, so we can get to them. There's one that's come up a handful of times, but I think this was the first person to ask. Can we get a refresher on the state of all of this for Flutter Web?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's one that I'm personally also really expectant for and can't wait for it to come out. So right now, developments are not active on the web integration for the payments plugin. That said, is definitely on our pipeline, something that we'd like to put out because there's web libraries for the providers that are supported right now, Google Pay and Apple Pay. So something that will make total sense. That said, too, again, this is an open source project, and if you take a look at the README, it's a project for which we expect the community to get involved. It's something that will be very welcomed. In that same vein, we don't see this as a Google project necessarily, even though it was started by Google. And so there's been already good contributions from the community, but we'll like that to develop even further, and just let it sail and go in the direction that everyone feels that it's more appropriate for their purposes. So feel free to take a look at the README and the contribution guidelines. It's very easy to get set up, and if you don't feel like committing code, that's okay. We have a section for issues and discussions where your participation and feedback would be fantastic. If you're willing to commit code, that's even better. So we're waiting for you there.
Yeah, and a lot of the questions, there's a set of questions that we've gotten in the chat that I think could be, nicely asked on the, or, by that I mean it'd be nice to ask them on the repo in terms of like different country support, different kind of backends and whatnot. Actually, but here, before we get too far, I wanted to say that quickly, because it was just what you were talking about, Jose. But we've got a question that I think pretty important for anyone who is kind of new to this entire space of app development. What does PSP stand for?
I'm not searching for it because I don't know where it is, but
Oh, I think
because
it's
there's a
payment service provider, right?
oh yeah, PSP is also a gaming
The
console.
Nintendo, or no, not Nintendo, of course, it's PlayStation. Yeah.
Yeah, but
What is?
it's
Oh, it's PlayStation Portable, right? But for us,
PlayStation
it's
Portable. Yeah.
payment service provider, I think.
Correct. Yeah, that's payment service provider, or also known as payment gateway. That is a
Hmm.
entity or a company that provides you with services if you're collecting payments. Sometimes this is just simply processing the payment, that is moving the funds from your customer credit card or bank account into your bank account as a merchant. But some other times this also includes other features like fraud analysis, like metrics, like merchant features, like invoicing, pretty much anything that a business selling online would need or would benefit from. It goes by the name of both PSP as payment service provider or payment gateway. And I'm sure you have heard about a few of those already.
Yep. Nice, great question. So let's see. What are some other good ones? Oh, this one is certainly worth covering. I love that Mohammed is thinking about security, and they ask how to handle the security on these payments. So can you say a
Especially in
little bit
payments,
about?
right?
Or exactly right. Couldn't be more important. So can you say a little bit just about, are there security things that a Flutter developer going through this process has to keep in mind? And which of those things are already handled by the various SDKs?
So I'd say that unless you're PCI DSS, which is like a whole payments regulation, PCI DSS compliant, then do not manage payment information of your customers. That depending on the country, I think that's illegal or forbidden in some way. But also, it's definitely not good for your business in the sense that if you mishandle that information, then you will be exposing your users. So most PSPs, most payment gateways, if you use their libraries, they will have proper security mechanisms. They are definitely PCI DSS compliant, and they will help you keep your information safe. Now, so for example, when you're using a website, they will be using an iframe to collect card information on the form. And the same goes for the application. Data is being treated as securely as possible. That that is, let's say, on one hand, make sure you use elements from your service providers in that sense in payments. Do not deal with payment information. Do not manage payment information yourself unless you're doing that as part of your business. But then second, there's a general rule of thumb that I apply that we covered before earlier, and that is assuming that client applications or client or websites running on client browsers are by default unsecure or are by default breakable. In the sense that if someone gets physical access to that device, that means that the information could be compromised. Even actually not only physical access, but if they have access to, if a bad intended actor got access to your device, they would have an opportunity to see what's part of that application in terms of what's in that phone, either through memory inspections or disk inspections and so on. So I generally like to treat client applications as not secure. So, and the reason why I talk about that is because I think for payments, it's important to have every kind of information that could be sensitive be dealt with in a secure place, like your backends, for example. We were talking about the price before. Our recommendation is that if you are doing price or item calculation, anything that has to do with payments, that you do that on a safe environment that you can trust. You know that your backends are private; they cannot be accessed externally, or they have keys that you're using to encrypt the information. So you get the information from there, you show in your app, but then when you're creating the transaction again, then that's something that happens again from your backend server to the PSP. There's some PSPs that have secure mechanisms to do it from your app, and you can use those very well. But as a general rule of thumb, I'm personally wary of client apps, and I take that with a special. I take special care of those scenarios, and I certainly recommend you to do the same thing. One additional thought is that using payment facilitators like Google Pay or Apple Pay definitely helps you there. And how does it do it? It does it in the sense that when you are asking for a payment mechanism, for example, let's say we go back to Google Pay, we're opening the payment sheet, I'm selecting this Visa card, and then I'm hitting continue. That information will go back through your app, but it will be encrypted. That is, only Google Pay or the PSP will be able to decrypt that information and see the context, right? So that's an extra layer of security that you have. So even if someone was able to get access to your device, they wouldn't be able to do anything with that. So I know it gave a collection of answers, but hopefully that makes sense. We can summarize it as: don't trust client apps by default. Do not handle payment information yourself unless you're PCI DSS compliant, and Google Pay and Apple Pay will help you stay more secure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I mean, any holistic approach to security, there's so many different facets to having a secure app, and I am going to put that in air quotes. But it's always great to be thinking about it, and Jose definitely nicely hit on kind of all of the basics and just the state of collecting payments. When you use those SDKs, you go a very, very long way toward having a secure checkout process.
Yeah. They say that full security is impossible, and getting close to 99.9%, the effort goes into infinite. So finding a sweet spot, I think, is appropriate and for your use case, and try to keep users safe.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we are kind of winding down on questions about pay specifically. there is, oh, here we have a little success story. Thanks so much, Pay Library. I have successfully integrated Google Pay with Stripe Gateway for payment on Shopify.
Nice. Cool. That's great
Yeah.
to hear. Well, if you have more thoughts or feedback, we'll love to hear them. But it's great to see that already.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I apologize to everyone listening at home. We're streaming on an unusual day today, and I didn't choose this day for the recurring day for the show because it's garbage day outside. So I'm trying to mute myself while the garbage truck is farting around picking up everybody's stuff, but can only do so much. Um, Here's an ambitious question: how can we create a payment processor?
Wow. Definitely ambitious.
Yeah, you're talking about founding another Stripe, essentially.
Funny shorts. Yeah. Where to start from? Find a good name
I
for your
mean,
PSP.
yeah, I think the answer to this is to not do it. I mean, if you want to make another payment processor, that's like a life commitment, to such a startup, um,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't want to take that lightly. And I'm guessing that you're asking something else, but if you're really asking that, then you'd want to know way more about it than Jose and I put together.
Yeah. And it falls under the category of business questions of trying to find a need that is not solved by the main PSPs today. There's very good coverage today. Like we have, especially with modern PSPs, with a lot of APIs and online services. It's gone a long way compared to back in the day. You can now take payments globally. You can do everything with API calls, webhooks, get information, capture payments, do stage payments. It's just incredible. So, but if you have found something that you think is not covered, and then again, we are back into the second episode of business class for engineers in payments, then it's something to look into. But yeah, it would be something certainly complex, and you'll be dealing with sensitive information as well. So it's important to get right people in and get it right from the beginning. Otherwise, I think the internet and reputation is not very forgiving in this field.
That's true. Yeah, people don't like when companies leak all their users' credit cards.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe a few kind of generic questions. There was, what was the one that I wanted to go with? Oh, this one is kind of pure Flutter. And say, hello, should we only use the build method for layouts, right? For initializations and instance creation, we should use init state. And short answer is yes. Yeah, when you're laying out your app, everything goes in the build method, and basically nothing else goes in the build method. You are just printing the next frame's worth of widgets, and kind of the most dynamic stuff that would go in there would be the callbacks for click events on those widgets. When you're setting anything up, that's where you kind of dive into init state, and we did that. I think it was after this question actually appeared, but in this episode we had a future that was in line in the build method, and then we pulled that out into init state. So you were definitely on the right track.
Oh, maybe they were just calling that out when they were seeing me typing and softly, gently suggesting, hey, you may want to do it differently.
Could be. Yeah, I'm not sure the actual timeline on that. That is possible. Okay, let's see here. Here's another. This is another ambitious one.
Out of those.
Can we make an IAP without a backend? An IAP stands for Identity Access Provider. So that would be something like Firebase Authentication or others. I
I'd
don't
say
know how
no.
you do that without a backend.
I think it's impossible. You need that
Yeah.
source of truth.
Yep.
Unless
I
you
think
do
need
it.
a backend.
Yeah. Or some of the source of remote, trustable truth.
Oh
We
yeah,
could go
like a
wild, but that
blockchain or
could be,
something.
yeah, I was going into that wild direction. Or a group of people
Yeah.
that has remote earplugs that receive every request. Well, any form of external social truth, I think you need. But the backend is a very good one that works very well.
Yep. Yep. And, obviously like Web3 and crypto and all that has kind of lost a little bit of its luster over the last few months as I think more and more developers realize that that doesn't actually unlock like an entire new universe of wonderfulness. In theory, a blockchain could be an identity access provider that was completely decentralized. Unfortunately, blockchains are extremely slow to write to. So you could only sign up, you'd have a very, very, very low bottleneck of new users that you could add to your Rolodex because that distributed trust is expensive to attain across all of your different nodes. So I think you're going to need a backend.
I didn't know that. That's actually pretty cool information that you have, Craig, in your brain.
Every now and then I hear something interesting and don't forget it immediately. Here's a question back to the pay plugin. Is there any roadmap for the project?
Yeah, so if you go to, I'm gonna go as I said, if you go to the discussions and issues in the Flutter plugin, you'll see a glimpse of that. So there's things like web integration, making the configuration be dynamic, as we have been discussing here as well. Especially if you go to the bottom, you see a few of them. So there's certain roadmap. I'd say it's been managed as the same as every other open source project. So it's been built with a contribution not only in terms of code but also in terms of decision and roadmap, with those guidelines in mind as well. And so you will see action there through discussions and issues, and those will turn, the most relevant ones will turn into feature requests that will then be implemented as just a regular flow for open source projects. But this is a great place to start discussions and issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. This does seem to be quite structured and has it's well organized. Now, Jose, I've been really driving on questions. Have you seen any that you want to get to? I can go to a few more here before we wrap up. But if there's any that you've seen, I don't want you to not feel like you have control of the reins either.
I haven't much, but I'm checking it right now. We have an allusion from Arbas to decentralized payments. That's something that I think connects very well with what you were saying, or doing payments in a decentralized environment. And I think the only place to do that right now is blockchain, as far as I know. So I think your answer very well fits into that. We have Burak Taban asking at 6:46. Well, my time actually, so it might be a different time in your in your time zone, whether this will be published in GitHub. And great news is that it's already published in GitHub, and it's been published for the last year and a half. So please do check it out. I would love to hear
But I
your
think,
thoughts.
yeah, now to fully answer that question, I think to merge his answer and your question, at least the way my brain is seeing all of this, we didn't really stray very far away from like the README, right? So that's what I think you mean, Jose, by this has been published for a super long time. In the code that Jose wrote today, is the
Oh,
raw Google button and everything? Is that also like in the README, and like where would someone find out about the raw Google payment button
yeah, it should be
if
there.
they
Let me double check and see if I can find it. But yeah,
assume?
you're actually understanding the questions the right way. I'm not misinterpreting most of them. Yeah, so you have an
Oh,
allusion
there it
to that
is.
same integration in
Nice,
the
nice.
advanced usage section. So you don't really, I don't really think you need that code. It's almost like 95% similar to this one. Well,
Yeah,
we do
just
have
that.
the kind of the putting the feature in a variable. So that's something that we may want to do here because, yes, as someone else pointed out before, this could be perceived as a bad practice as well.
Yeah, and even if that function does hold on to a single future internally, um, I would still recommend the developers make the change that we made because you're really depending on the client to, you're really depending on the library to always behave in that way.
That's a good point. We have one really good question from Hafites Rana, how to handle the decimal double value in total amounts. And I think that's a good question. because it's different on different platforms. Concretely on Google Pay, it's been treated as a string. So it's expecting a string with a dot separation for all locales. Different locales have different punctuation, as you probably are aware, and that's the reason why you're asking. Whereas, if I remember correctly, the Apple Pay library expects an integer or a long, basically a number. And so that was a compromise that had to be done for the main layer of the library, for the Dart side of the library. By the way, I love when you say Dart side. It just sounds like something else. And
It
that's very
does.
cool. Be on the Dart end, we have chosen to go with string, which works for both areas. And there's additional logic that we are doing on the Apple Pay native side, on the iOS side, if you look at the plugin, to make sure that there's no catches in there. Because as you will point out, different numbers with more precision, for example, or larger numbers could have trouble on the rounding up. So we haven't found a let's say 100% working solution, but this works for majority of the cases. And in any case, it's important to keep in mind that that number is not going to define what you charge your users. That's something that is defined internally in your backend when you make the order. This is only there for UI purposes, so that when you open up the payment
Mm,
sheet, if you have a final price, the price will show up in here. So that's not going to modify the final price if that's a concern.
that
But
you
yeah,
actually charge, right, right. Though,
yeah.
of course, best to not accidentally mislead um, your users, especially with like a decimal location error. That goodness, they would
Yeah,
be quite alarmed.
2 places to the right, big
Right.
impact.
Yep. All right, we are near the end here. I do want to wish Jaspier Khalif a happy birthday. Nice.
Aha. Happy birthday, Jasper. And thank you for being here your birthday. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Hopefully they've stuck around the whole time. All right. Maybe the final question here, at least from my side. Spectator says, observable. Are we using reactiveness? And this show is just called Observable Flutter because you get to watch people write Flutter. You get to observe the Flutter. And observable is a class in Dart. I forget if it's from the Dart SDK or the Flutter SDK. Somewhere there's like some popular observable class. And of course, it's the language, programming wide pattern of observable reactiveness and whatnot. So that's the cheeky name for the show. Jose, any closing thoughts about pay or anything else?
I'd say the only thing that I think we have covered everything. So the only thing is that if you want to keep on engaging with us, there's a couple of links that we will post in Twitter, on the Google Pay Devs account, potentially on Flutter as well. If we convince them to retweet, we'll see. Let me look at Craig's face. Maybe it works. And those links are pointing to the plugin in pub.dev and then to the GitHub repo as well. Remember that this is a central place where you can engage with us, engage with the plugin itself, contribute, add your thoughts, feature requests, discuss, because this is what, as we covered earlier, what determines the path forward. So we'd love to see you there. We'll certainly wait for you there. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Absolutely.
And
I would also point all of our viewers at 17 Days of Flutter, which, if my math checks out, I believe that starts today because I think we're 17 days away from Flutter Forward coming on January 25th in Nairobi. And the next episode of Observable Flutter will be back at the normal time this week, Thursday, so only like 3 days away. And I will be taking a stab at the coding challenge that Khan mentioned in the video. She said there's going to be a weekend coding challenge, so get your keyboards and IDEs ready. And I am going to come in to that episode with my keyboard and IDE ready. So on Thursday, we'll be several days into the 17 days of Flutter as we approach Flutter Forward. And I invite everyone to tune back in, and we're going to be doing some video game things because that's a big theme of the Learning to Fly Season 2 episode that's coming in the 17 Days of Flutter. All right. Jose, thank you. You waited, I want to say it was 6 months ago that you first reached out. And scheduling things across the Atlantic Ocean is quite a headache. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for joining twice. I think we got through a lot of stuff here. We showed the kind of the full end-to-end of the Pay plugin. We integrated it on Apple. We integrated it on Android. And I think folks are going to be set up to collect payments in Flutter.
It was well worth the wait, and a lot of fun. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody, have a great week, and I will see you all on Thursday.